Welcome back to the 4 books of Confucian learning. Today we continue our exploration of the Analects. So today we'll look at the second passage, which I'll read out now in English. It states, Master Yo said, "There are few who live according to family reverence and fraternity, yet are fond of offending their superiors. There have been none who dislike offending their superiors, yet are fond of creating disorder. The exemplary person works on the foundation being established, the way develops. Family reverence and fraternity, are they not the foundation of humanity?" This passage is arranged second for 2 reasons, the speaker and its content. Master Yo was a student who was 43 years younger than Confucius, but it's traditionally believed that his speech and demeanor resembled Confucius, so much so that he was esteemed as the teacher after Confucius passed away, and therefore his words are placed second in the entire text. The second reason is that this particular passage relates to family reverence and fraternity, which are foundational in Confucian learning. Now, if you remember, the very first passage of the Analects, Confucius tells us about a learning and constant practice of this learning that leads to great joy and also inner satisfaction. But he doesn't tell us the specifics. And it's here with Master Yo who tells us that it's actually family reverence and fraternity. These are the starting points of the learning and practice that Confucius was talking about. He tells us that the starting point is really at home and how we relate to our parents and our siblings. Now, this idea of cultivation starting at home is well encapsulated by this wonderful story from the 15th century. Now, this is a story about a renowned Confucian scholar by the name of Yang Fu. And in his younger years, he was very much interested in the profound meanings of life. So at the time, there was a very eminent Buddhist master by the name of Venerable Wu Ji. And Yang Fu decided to make the journey to Sichuan to learn from this great master. So this is a photo of some mountains in Sichuan, and you can imagine that the travel was not easy. Eventually, he made it there, and he was fortunate enough to have a meeting with the master. And so he asked about the essence of the Buddhist teachings. The Venerable replied, "Have you not seen the Buddha?" Yang Fu was quite surprised and asked whereabouts he would see the Buddha. Venerable Wuji then said, "Try returning home, and you'll meet with a person who drapes their clothes around them and wears their shoes backwards. And this person is the Buddha." Yang Fu was really happy and excited, and he rushed all the way back home. Obviously, it did take some time, and eventually he arrived in the middle of the night. Now, his mother heard her son, was so happy that he was finally home, that she didn't even turn on the light. She didn't even light the lamp, and just rushed down to open the door. When she opened the door, Yang Fu saw that she had simply sort of draped some clothes around her nightwear and had even worn her shoes backwards in her haste. And then he remembered the words of the Venerable, and he realized that the esoteric principles of Buddhism were not found in a secluded mountain retreat, but in the love of our parents. And similarly, Confucius, through the words of Master Yo here, tells us that the way to be exemplary, the greatest virtue, is not found in some mysterious practices, but in the daily practices, the daily interactions of life at home. It's how we relate to our parents and our siblings. And everyone has a family, regardless of, whether it was during the times of Confucius or now, regardless of where you're born in the world. We all have parents. So this idea of family reference. What is it? Well, this concept was so important that Confucius dedicated a series of lectures just on this topic, and it was recorded and known as the Classic of Family Reverence. So this particular classic, in Chinese, Xiao Jing, became part of the Confucian canon around the same time as the Analects and has been read and studied by scholars throughout the history of China. Now, it's also been translated into other languages, as you can see here. And the Classic of Family Reverence provides us with the definitive explanation of what family reverence really means. Now, this is provided in the opening passage, so let's look at that now. Confucius states, "Your physical person with its hair and skin are received from your parents. Vigilance and not allowing anything to do injury to your person is where family reverence begins. Distinguishing yourself and walking the proper way in the world, raising your name high for posterity, and thereby bringing esteem to your father and mother. It is in these things that family reverence finds its consummation. This family reverence, then, begins in service to your parents, continues in service to your leader, and culminates in distinguishing yourself in the world." So you can see, of course, that family reverence is a very all-encompassing, extensive concept and has a great scope. We can analyze it as 3 stages. First of all, it's how we act within the family and how we're mindful of our family members with our parents as representative. So we have to be considerate of our parents. The second stage is in the community. When we're at work, it's our leaders then that are representative. So we have to be considerate of our leaders. And then finally, it extends to all areas of our life in which we distinguish ourselves and bring esteem to our parents. Now, what I want to do throughout this talk is to explain these various stages in relation to passages in the Analects. So first of all, this consideration of our parents, which is really not making them worry and giving them peace of mind. And it starts with something very simple. It starts with taking care of ourselves, our physical and our mental health. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to the children's emergency department at a hospital before, but if you have been, you might notice that a lot of parents obviously bring in their ill children. But it's often the parents that are actually even more distressed than the child. And when you give the child an injection or take bloods, it's not just the child, but also the mother that's crying. The parent sees the child as part of themselves, and when they're hurt, when the child is hurt, when the child is unwell, the parents themselves are quite distressed. Now, this is not only the case for young children. If we're in our 30s or 40s, we get into an accident and end up in hospital. Who visits us? Who takes care of us post-discharge? It's often our family. And what if we have mental health problems? We can't study or work. Who picks up the pieces? Again, it's likely our parents and family. So that's why if we look after ourselves, we care for ourselves, then we're not a burden to others. So early on in traditional Chinese children's textbooks, they taught really the baby steps to looking after yourself, like the Dizugui. Teaches us to have a routine routine in our life when we go to bed, to brush our teeth, the dental hygiene, but also personal hygiene as well. And we start to build these habits from a very young age so that we can live a healthy life in the future. Now, Confucius in the Analects, he wasn't talking to children. He was talking to adults, people like you and I, people even in their 50s, who came to learn about how to improve their quality of life, how to realize excellence, how to achieve their and realize their innate potential, which in Confucian terms is realizing our humanity. So Confucius also taught them to start by taking care of themselves. And I think everyone would agree that, self-care and healthy living is very important. But Confucius tells us that we look after ourselves, not for our own self-interest. So, obviously this is an important outcome, but we look after ourselves in consideration of others. And that's the difference. So it's in our mindset, it's in our thoughts, not necessarily our actions. So two people could be going to the gym, but one person does it in consideration of others, and that's the person who achieves excellence. So this looking after ourselves in consideration of others is, in the first instance, grounded in the family. So we have to consider the feelings of our parents. And there are good reasons for this, according to Confucian teachings. Well, first of all, we know our parents probably for the longest time, since we were born. And our parents have also nurtured and developed us in many ways. Not only do we receive this physical form, this physical body from our parents, but also they've helped us take our first steps to life. Not only physically, but emotionally, mentally, morally. They've been there every step of the way. And so this is why there's a particular quote here that I'd like to read out to you. And it's very well expressed by Henry Rosemont Jr. and Roger Ames in the introduction to their translation of the Xiaojing. It says that it is beyond dispute that the home is the most influential context for the well-being of children, their intellectual, social, emotional, and moral development. And among the most significant research in the field of human development is that on the attachment between the infant and their caregiver, often the parent, because this is the foundation for any human being's relationship with others. So the parent-child relationship is in fact the foundation for all our relationships in life. Now, this is quite easy to understand from maybe a social and emotional point of view, but what about morally? Well, actually, how our parents act towards us provide us with models of moral values and moral conduct. And it's this that we emulate and that we bring to our relationships in the future. John Day explains this very well in terms of the idea of trust. So he says here, the model for trust is the earliest form of trust in a human life, the infant's trust in its mother. Trust in this case develops in response to the mother's love. So the infant, before it can even walk or talk, can recognize its mother's attention, their mother's attention to its wants and needs. How? Through the actions she takes to satisfy the infant, through her accompanying facial and vocal expressions. And the infant recognizes this constant, benevolent desire for their happiness. And this is the model of trust that they build upon and that they're able to provide and emulate for people that they meet later in life. So you can see, of course, that our parents nurture and develop us in more ways than we can imagine and more ways than even our parents know. So it's quite fitting, of course, that Confucians, they talk about a consideration for all others, but it begins and it's trained through our home, through our consideration for parents. Now, if we remember this will help us in understanding the following passages that we're going to look at from the Analects. So, the first passage is a question from Meng Wubo, who asks about family reverence. And Confucius says, the only time one should have parents worry is when one is ill. Now, Meng Wubo was actually a member of the ruling house in the state of Lu, which is where Confucius was born. So it's quite significant, in fact, that a senior minister of government is asking about family reverence. And that's because family reverence and fraternity is integral to Confucian learning, this highest learning that's actually applicable to all walks of life. It's applicable to all careers. As we know, it's more about a mindset than any sort of subject area or any particular action. It's how we deal and how we think about the world and what we do. So that's why it's applicable to everyone. But even more so in terms of the Confucian model of government. As we also know from the highest learning, our self-cultivation is what provides order within the household and ultimately within the state. So it's highly relevant that someone like Meng Wubo is asking about family reverence. Confucius says that we should only make our parents worry when we are sick. Now, doesn't this contradict what we heard before when Confucius said that we have to look after ourselves? Well, let me ask you this. Do you know anyone who has never gotten sick before? Even young people who have really strong immune systems, it's inevitable that, they'll get a cold or a runny nose or a headache at some point in their lives. So these things, like a common cold, are somewhat out of our control. But what Confucius is saying here is that anything other than the common cold and these sort of small illnesses should be within our responsibility and should be within our control. So, other things like our studies, our careers, our extracurricular interests, the friends that we associate with, etc., all of these are things that we have to be accountable for. We have to manage well so that our parents don't worry. Now, you might say, well, my parents actually worry a lot and they actually should just relax. But think about it. Our parents are decades older than us and they have a lot more life experience. So if they're worried about something, then it often means that there's an option that maybe we haven't considered. Or it could mean that we haven't demonstrated good organizational skills in the past. And that's why they have to nag us. And that's why they're worried about us. So what do we have to do? We have to prove it to them that we can plan ahead, that they don't have to worry, and we have to allay their fears. Now, this is part and parcel of putting yourself in their shoes, thinking from their perspective, and ultimately giving them peace of mind. Now, at the end of the day, who benefits? If we can plan ahead, if we look after ourselves, well, actually, we are the ones benefiting. But it's a win-win situation because if they don't worry about us, if we look after ourselves, then both sides are benefiting. So in this particular idea, we can see that family reverence, this consideration of our parents, not only involves looking after our health, but managing all aspects of our life. Let's take a look at the next passage. Here, Confucius says, while our parents are alive, do not travel afar. If traveling, one must have a fixed destination. Now, in the times of Confucius, travel was difficult and dangerous, and it often takes several months before you reached your destination. Along the way, we could encounter natural or man-made disasters and could even lose our life. So that was in those days. That's why he's saying best not to travel. Obviously, today, we don't think of travel as being life-threatening, but it does still carry its risks. Now, even before the time of COVID, there are other infectious diseases like TB or hepatitis. And, terrorist attacks and public safety was an issue. So if we do want to travel, we have to plan ahead and prepare well. We have to make sure that we know what's there when we get there, what's happening at our destination, at least accommodation and food, maybe, and make precautions. Importantly, we have to tell our parents so they don't worry. When we get there, we should make regular contact, send them a message. And throughout our stay overseas, we should try to keep in regular contact so that they know that we're alive and well. Now, obviously, this particular instruction is not only related to overseas travel. In fact, it relates to if we're at home and, when we come in and out of the house. So if, for example, we've told our parents that we're coming home for dinner, then often they might wait for us so that we can have dinner together. So it's important that we're punctual. If we tell them that we're coming home in the evening around 8 o'clock, and by 8:20 we're still not there, then our parents will start to worry. If by 8:45, 8:50, we still haven't arrived home, they'll start imagining the worst. Like, did they get hit by a bus that must be lying on the road somewhere and no one knows, they haven't contacted me, etc., etc. So if we're late by, anything like 20 minutes, then we should at least give them a call or a message so that they know where we are and what's happened. Now, you might think this is a bit tedious, but this would be the case if we were running late for a meeting. We would try to call up, make contact, let them know that we're delayed and in a new expected time of arrival, so that the people who are waiting for us don't get annoyed. Now, all of these sorts of habits, like being punctual, being accountable, good communication, timely communication, this is all really helpful as habits and skills for life, not only at home, but in the workplace. So as you can see, that this kind of training happens at home and happens because we actually consider it of our parents. So in this idea, Confucius is telling us that, if we're traveling, then we have to plan ahead, don't make them worry, and also keep in regular contact. In the next conversation, it's Ziyou this time asking about family reverence. So it's a hot topic because it was so integral to Confucian learning. Confucius here provides a different answer. He says, nowadays, people think they are dutiful when they support their parents. Yet dogs and horses are also able to do something in the way of support. Unless there is respect, where is the difference? So, yes, this was during the times of Confucius. People thought that simply providing for the material or physical needs of their parents was enough. They thought that was family reverence. Now, here Confucius is telling them that it's not. And he provides a very stark comparison using the idea of animals, horses and hounds. Now, horses and hounds are still able to service their master in some way. So dogs in the past were used for home security, horses for the farm chores. But they don't know respect. And it's this respectfulness that distinguishes between the service to parents by children from the service to the master by the horses and hounds, these dogs and horses. So that's what is so important, this respect. Now, unfortunately, this misconception still remains even today. People think that just simply financially supporting their parents is enough. That's what family reverence is. So we might buy our parents a house, pay their bills, give them a monthly allowance, pay for their holidays, medical expenses, etc., and think that, we're already forking out a lot. We're already quite dutiful to our parents. What more do they want? And, because of this, because we think that we're doing a lot, we expect them to be grateful. And we might even look down on them when they're old and infirm and they have to completely rely on us. Now, with that kind of an attitude, studies are showing that, in contemporary society, contemporary Asian communities, elderly people, in the past, of course, elderly people would often live with their adult children. You'd have 3 generations or even more living together. But these days, studies are showing that Asian elderly people would prefer to live by themselves or even in an elderly home because they don't want to put up with that attitude or disrespect from their children and their grandchildren. And that's really sad. So what Confucius is saying here still holds currency today, that we need this respect. Now, this respect is not in, our words or polite actions. It's actually in our thoughts. Do we know the feelings of our parents? What are they thinking? Are they feeling lonely? Are they worried? Are they happy? Do they worry about us? So all of these things we need to take into consideration. Now, because of that, it's not just about looking after them, looking after ourselves, it's actually thinking about the family as a whole. And that's where this idea of fraternity comes in, this harmony that we have with our siblings. And, if you're an only child, then harmony, getting along with your cousins or your peers. So what is fraternity? Well, the Deeds Way explains it very well in a nutshell. It tells us that fraternity, older siblings loving and caring for their younger ones, younger siblings loving and respecting the older ones. Getting along with one's siblings is a sign of respecting one's parents and caring that they are happy. So fraternity is actually part and parcel of family reverence, and that's why they're often when we talk about family reverence, we often talk about fraternity in the same breath. So fraternity is this idea of getting along with your siblings. And by doing that, you don't make your parents worry because they want to see harmony within the family, harmony between their children. So the third issue here, the third idea, is yes, we support our parents. That's very important. But we do so with respect. And with this respect, it means actually thinking about the wider issues, like our siblings. Now, this idea of respect, our attitude, it follows on in this particular passage. This time it's Zixia asking. Confucius says, it is the attitude that matters. If young people offer their services when there is work to do, or let their teachers drink and eat when there's wine and food, how could this ever pass as family reverence? So here, this word attitude is actually a translation of the words that I've highlighted in red, Chinese characters. In Chinese, 色难. So 色 in Chinese literally means one's facial expression or countenance. Nan means difficulty. So difficulty maintaining an amiable facial expression. Why is that? Well, let's face it, we're all adults and we have our work and we have our jobs and our own lives. So when our parents ask us to do things like run errands or do chores around the house or help them with something, we feel that it imposes on our agenda. It imposes on our life. Now, we might be quite polite and not overtly debate with them or outright refuse them, but it shows in our attitude. When we do it, we're not really willing. It's in our manner, we might procrastinate, etc. And so you can see that Confucius addresses the heart of the problem. It's in our thoughts. At the end of the day, that's what we have to address, not our facial complexion or our appearance. We have to be willing and happy to help out. If we think about it, what they're getting us to do is actually part of home life. It's part of helping out the family. And we're part of the family too, aren't we? So if we just simply change that thought, it changes everything. Now, in another instance, Confucius is asked about a son. And this son, he's so hardworking that he works the fields every day until his hands and his feet are calloused. And yet people still don't believe that he possesses family reverence, this moral quality. And so someone asks Confucius why that is. Confucius replies that that's because the son lacks respect. In his speech, he's not humble, and also he doesn't have an amiable manner towards his parents. And that's why he doesn't possess family reverence. So you can see here that it's about our attitude. Confucius even poses a question to us. He says, if we're students, everyone has teachers, and we're respectful to our teachers, right? We might help them out, provide them with food and drink, etc. But does treating our parents in the same way as serving our teachers count as family reverence? Obviously, as you can see, it doesn't. And why is that? Well, that's because the parent and child relationship is underpinned by a natural and unconditional love. This unconditional love that our parents show us. And therefore, we also have to, through our family reverence, provide a sort of natural affection, which is very different from other relationships that we might have in our lives. And so it's important then that this attitude comes across naturally and willingly. So this is why this is the crux of the issue. The heart of the matter is family reverence is really how we use our hearts. So here, this other idea then is, in considering our parents, we have to be keen. We have to be happy when we help them out. So at the end of the day, it's how we feel about our parents. But that's really the heart of the matter. And it comes across in this particular passage. Confucius says, one must know the age of our parents. This is both our joy and our worry. Well, why is it that he said that understanding the age of, or knowing the age of our parents can give rise to two, different emotions? Well, first of all, it's a great joy that our parents are older by 1 year, because it means that they've been cared for, and they can live longer. So the older they are, the better. That's something to celebrate. But at the same time, if they are getting older, it means that there's less time on Earth for them, because everyone has a finite lifespan. It also means that we can spend less time with them. There's less time to learn from them. So time is limited and time is running out. And that's why we're worried. Now, this life expectancy is ever increasing. So, in the United Kingdom, average life expectancy of an adult is around 81 years old. And this is, so much better than it was in the times of Confucius, when it was very rare for someone to live beyond the age of 70. So, because of medical advances, the life expectancy has increased. But what that means now is that people in their later years often have various chronic conditions, aches and pains. So in some ways, this is not just about the age of parents. It's actually about their health. The older they get, the more frail they become. So if they are in good health now, we should really cherish that. We should help them maintain good health and well-being, and so they don't suffer in their old age. And this is certainly an important cause of concern for us. So you can see here, through these various passages, Confucius provides us with very detailed instructions on this idea of family reverence. But notice, of course, that he doesn't go into the details of, what we do on a day-to-day basis, at least not in the Analects. What he does is really draw out this mindset that we're meant to have. And it's a mindset that gives rise to genuine care for our parents. It's this mindset that has infinite potential. Now, after reading these passages, we can see, of course, Confucius is telling us to really value our parents, really cherish them, look after them, don't make them worry, keep them happy. But does that mean then that we have to do everything they say, everything that they wish to keep them happy? Let's look at the next passages. Time is a conversation between Meng Yizi, one of the senior ministers, and Confucius, and also Fan Shi. Now, Meng Yizi asks about family reverence. Confucius this time provides a very short answer. He says, never disobey. Meng Yizi, probably because of his senior position, doesn't really clarify the answer. Fanshi, who's one of the students of Confucius, was driving him back. Now, Fanshi is also one of the drivers of Mengyizi. And Confucius talks to Fanshi about the conversation that he had. And it's Fanshi who asks about what this answer means. He asks for clarity. Confucius says then, when your parents are alive, serve them according to ritual propriety. When they pass away, bury them according to ritual propriety. Make sacrifices to them according to ritual propriety. So the sacrifices here refers to commemorating the anniversary of their funerals and commemorating our ancestors. So that has to accord with ritual propriety. Now, if we read simply the first two lines of this passage, we would go away thinking that, it means that we should always follow every instruction of our parents. But this could not be further from the truth. We have to, according to Confucius here, thanks to the clarification, we have to adhere to ritual propriety. So this disobey is never disobey the dictates of ritual propriety. So it's not about our own ideas. It's not about our parents' wishes necessarily. It has to accord with the guidelines. So ritual propriety provides us with a standard. We don't go to excesses in caring for our parents, nor are we insufficient in our care, because there's a standard there. Now, this ritual propriety can be found in the guidelines of the Confucian classics, but also it has a much wider scope than that. Because this idea is, when adapted to modern life, includes things like the national laws, rules and regulations of organizations and groups that we're part of. It also involves socially agreed codes of conduct. We would call it etiquette. And even the way that we, our personal deportment. All of this is encompassed by ritual propriety. And unfortunately, there's no Western concept or virtue that, is an equivalent to this idea of ritual propriety. Now, what it's telling us, of course, is that there are objective standards. And when we care for our parents, we have to keep this in mind. Now, I'm going to give you two sort of simple examples just to help you get your head around this. So if we don't think about ritual propriety, we think of, say, something like etiquette. That might help. Imagine, although this will probably never happen to you, but imagine that you're at a department store. You're queuing up at the checkout. It's a very, very long queue. You're with your parents, and they're worried about the parking fees, very expensive parking fees. So they tell you to cut in front of the queue and push your way to the front so that you can, get out faster. Now, do you follow what they say? Obviously not, because it would be against, what we do socially, social etiquette, wait in line, wait our turn. So, but what do you do? Now, even if you disagree with your parents, we shouldn't be rude about it, and we shouldn't make them upset. So we put ourselves in their shoes, think from their perspective, and think about solutions for them to address this issue. For example, we could say that, one of us can stay in the line and the other person could move the car, for example, and that would help with the parking fees. So it's about thinking from their perspective and not simply disagreeing. In another example, let's say you're filling out your tax return. Your parents come, see that you're doing that, and they say, well, why don't you just fudge the numbers so that you don't have to pay so much tax? Would you do this? Well, again, no, because this would be against the law this time. Not only would you be cheating the government, but you'd be cheating the people of the nation, because our taxes, of course, go to creating the public services that we all enjoy. Public infrastructure like schools, hospitals, or roads. So we know what we have to do, but oftentimes it means that we have to also explain to our parents so that they understand. And, we do this in the right tone and at the right time. So this passage then is telling us very clearly that we consider our parents, but it doesn't mean that we have to follow everything that they say. We still have to go through objective guidelines, ritual propriety. And this is very much in keeping with the next passage that we'll talk about. And this is the idea of helping our parents change. Confucius said, when serving parents, remonstrate at the first signs of fault. If you see that they do not take your advice, be all the more respectful and do not contradict them. Let not your efforts turn to bitterness. So this idea of remonstrating is actually helping our parents change. This is very different from the previous instructions. Previously, we were told, we have to look after our parents, their physical needs, their mental health, keep them happy. But now it's actually, we have to think for our parents. We have to help them change, help them cultivate, and lead meaningful lives and do no wrong. So this idea of remonstration as part and parcel of family reverence was so important that there was one chapter dedicated to this whole topic of remonstration in the classic of family reverence. And I've just extracted a few sentences here so you can get the idea. It says, if confronted by reprehensible behavior on their parent's part, a child has no choice but to remonstrate with their parent. Since remonstrance is the only response to immorality, how could simply obeying the commands of one's parent be deemed family reverence? So it's very clear here that helping them change is actually an important part of family reverence itself, rather than blindly following what they say. Now that we know this, we have to know when to help them change and how. So as it says here, we have to remonstrate at the first signs of fault. So as soon as we detect something wrong, we have to find ways of reminding them. Now, obviously, this requires us to have high attention to detail. We have to be very observant of our parents. We have to pay attention to what they say, what they do, but also read between the lines. And, what are they thinking? So when we remonstrate, or we help our parents change, we have to think about the consequences of what they're doing and also their intentions. Now, Xunzi, who lived over 100 years after Confucius, another famous philosopher, lists out specifically times when we might not listen to our parents. And that's when three different elements. So first of all, if we follow the instructions, it causes danger to the family, causes disgrace to the family, or requires us to act against ritual propriety. So in all of these cases, we shouldn't listen. And then he ultimately concludes by saying that we follow the dictates of the way rather than those of our leader, follow the requirements of morality rather than the wishes of one's parent. So we have to make sure that it's not about what we want, not about what they want, but actually according with the rules of morality and ritual propriety. So this is in relation to thinking about the consequences of the actions. What about the intentions? Well, second century statesman and philosopher Zhang Tong, who wrote the Changyan, the Admirable Sayings, mentioned 6 situations in which we shouldn't listen to our parents. So first is when they're seeking revenge unlawfully. Second is if they appoint someone who's incompetent for a job. They live extravagantly. They look down on education, Confucian education, or virtuous scholars. Or if they oppose assistance to a friend in need, in which all of these cases we should not listen to their instructions. Now, obviously, these are very well-defined situations, and we can, using our knowledge of the highest learning and the Analects, extrapolate to our modern life. But you can already see the underlying trend here. The second idea then is how we do it. So when we do it and how we do it. As it says here, we should try to remind them. But if they don't take our advice, we have to be respectful. Don't argue with them, and certainly don't resent them. And it's also explained in the Deeds of Way itself, when it says that, if our parents do wrong, we should urge them to change. Do so, don't shout at them, but with a kind expression and a caring voice. If they don't accept our advice, which is often the case, try again, but only when they're in a better mood. And be sincere about it. Show them that we actually care for them. It's not about us, it's about them. And if they get angry with us, don't hold it against them. Don't give up on them. Now, this whole process of helping our parents change is really important, and we have to do it with great patience. We have to remember when they also tried to help us change, to help us develop better habits. Oftentimes it takes not weeks, but even years to help us improve. And they'd have to nag us and keep reminding us, but they never gave up on us. And that's what we should do to our parents as well. Never give up on them. Find different opportunities. Obviously, when we're helping others change, the best way to do so is to change ourselves. Well, no one wants to listen to a hypocrite. So we have to do what we say. We have to be the change that we want others to be. We have to walk the talk. Now, that's the best way. And by being that example, we naturally inspire others. So helping them change is not necessarily through our words. It can be ultimately through our example, through what we do, and showing them that we can lead a productive, successful, happy life by doing the right things. That's this final idea of being considerate of our parents. And you can see that this first stage of family reverence is quite holistic in a way. It's not just about our parents in terms of their physical needs, not just about, not making them worry, giving them peace of mind, but it's about ultimately helping them cultivate and improve in the long term. Now, you can see, of course, that this family reverence, this first stage, doesn't stop when we start work, when we move out of the house or live overseas, because we still have to look after ourselves in consideration of our parents. Everything that we have to do, we should be mindful of whether our parents might worry about it. So this extends to the second stage, in which now we're out in the community, at work, and we have to be considerate of our leaders. And essentially, it's translating the attitudes, the skills that we learnt within the home to the workplace, to our work life. And if you think about it, skills like being punctual, diligent, good interpersonal skills, empathy that we develop by simply being mindful of our parents, all of these are things that employers look for when they interview their applicants. So all of these are things that we can bring to the workplace, having trained ourselves within the home. And that's what's called practicing the proper way, making sure we have these good habits, these moral qualities. And that's why in this passage, the second passage, Master Yo said that those who live according to family reverence and fraternity would not be fond of offending their superiors, nor would they be fond of creating disorder. Why is that? Because offending superiors and creating disorder, these are poor forms of interpersonal skills, poor forms of communication. If we want to affect change, create change in the workplace, then we do so through unity rather than division. We do so through reason rather than creating disorder. So providing reasons and arguments and evidence shows our leaders, our superiors, that we are actually working in the best interests of the organization and not for our selfish interests. So you can see, of course, that, when we are considerate of our parents, then we can actually put ourselves in the perspective and the shoes of our leaders. What are they thinking? How are they feeling? And how can we really help them? And do so without offending them. Do so in a very efficient and productive way. Now, you can see, of course, that family reverence helps us get along with others. And if everyone learned about family reverence, then this would be very useful for achieving community harmony. And that's why this explains Confucius's answer here. Confucius was once asked why was he not employed in governing. At that time, he had resigned and was no longer in government. And he replies that the documents being one of the classics, states, "It is all in family reverence. Just being reverent to your parents and friendly to your siblings is carrying out the work of government. In doing this, I am employed in governing. Why must I be employed in governing?" So he sort of turns the question around and tells the person, what do you mean by governing? Governing at the end of the day is not just having a title or a rank or a salary. It's actually doing your work, creating harmony in the community. And how do we do this? By helping others understand this idea of family reverence and fraternity. And if they can do that, then this is engaging in the work of the government, helping create an ordered society. So you can see that, it's not enough if we, here in the first stage, simply have a good home life, get along with our parents and siblings. It's not enough that we also have a good work life and have a good salary. But the third stage is when we actually think outside simply our home and our work life and help others in the community and beyond. And, we can see that people around us are suffering and we want to help them. We share with them these great teachings. We share with them the secrets of our success and how we might have achieved a good life within our home and work. So ultimately, how do we help others? Well, that's the second part of this passage here. It says that the exemplary person works on the foundation. And once the foundation is established, then the way, harmony within ourselves, others, community, and the environment, this great harmony, this is how the way develops. So what's the foundation? The foundation is in family reverence and fraternity. So we ultimately have to work on ourselves. And this self is not simply this physical self, not simply, as we said, taking care of ourselves, but the mental and the moral aspects of ourselves. We have to cultivate ourselves not only with our parents in mind, but also all those who've come before us, our ancestors. If we think about it from a scientific perspective, our genes are actually the combination of our parents, 50% our father, 50% our mother. But their genes are also the combination of their parents, and so on and so forth. And so really, you can see that in our DNA blueprint, we hold the genetic material of all of our ancestors. This physical body embodies all of those before us, but not just on a physical level, also on a cultural level. How we act, how we behave also reflects on our family lineage. And we bring to our life the values imparted by our family, our parents, who also learn from their family. And this is well expressed in this particular quote by Roger Ames and Henry Rosemont Jr. They say, in keeping the body, the self, intact, is the inclusive process of embodying the tradition. So it's not just the physical self, but this cultural tradition, drawing upon the cultural tradition as a resource for distinguishing oneself in the world, contributing to its cultural resources by establishing a name for oneself and one's family that will be remembered by posterity. So this is not creating a name for yourself or trying to achieve fame. It's actually passing down, preserving and passing on these great cultural resources to continue the great work of prior generations. And so they say that the body of the cultural tradition is embodied in each generation as it is perpetuated for those that follow. It's about living in memory of the past, but thinking of those to come, the future generations. And this is so well encapsulated in the actual Chinese character of family reverence itself, pronounced as xiao. So I've provided the small seal script, the ancient script here in the middle. And you can see it's made up of two parts, a top and a bottom. The bottom part we've seen before. It's a pictograph resembling a child, like the infant here with its arms sort of out, wriggling about and can be active. So here, of course, it represents the younger generations. The top half of this character is an abbreviated form of the character for old, as you can see here. And it's meant to represent the hairs of the older person becoming grey and white. But here, it represents not just one person, but the older generations. So in this one character, the younger generations come together with the older generations, and it shows this intergenerational continuity in which the two generations are united. We live in memory of the past, our parents, those that have come before us, but also in mindfulness of those who will come in the future. Now, today we've been talking a lot about various theories and various instructions in the Analects, and I'd like to end with a story that might, bring to light what we've talked about. Now, this story is about a young child whose mother passes away when he's around the age of 9. And obviously, this is a time of much grief and sadness for both his father and himself. But rather than sort of being overcome by this sadness, he uses it as a motivator to think of ways to help his father. But he's only 9, so, what can he do? And they're a poor family as well. So he thinks of strategies to help his father sleep well at night after a long day at work. What he does is in the summer, he fans the pillows cool, and in the winter, he uses his own body heat to warm up the bed so his father doesn't have to suffer the cold. And he doesn't just do this for a few nights, he does this for years. So much so that everyone in the community knows about him, about his great character, his family reverence. And later on, when he gets older, he's recommended for a post in government. And there we know, of course, that from the historical texts that he was also a very honest and very efficient and successful government official, someone who had great character. So this person who I'm talking about is Huang Xiang, and he lived in the 1st century. We can see that his simple acts of genuine care for his father not only had an impact on people in his time, but because he was recorded in the historical texts, like the history of the former Han at the bottom here, people in the future would also be able to read about his story. His story was also included in children's primers like the 3-character classic in the top right here, and also in the 24 exemplars of family reverence. So children, generations, were inspired and moved to this day by his great example. So we can see, of course, that it doesn't take a lot. If a 9-year-old can do it, so can we. And it's just simple acts, using our heart, using our mind, really caring, rather than simply going through the motions. And at the end of the day, you can see that if we benefit ourselves, if we benefit others, we're actually benefiting ourselves. If we care for others, consider others, then we're actually caring for ourselves as well. And it's really, this family reverence is as simple as constantly being mindful of others, and in the first instance, our parents, rather than ourselves. And if we can do that, then we are on the path to excellence. This is what Confucians would call realizing our humanity. Humanity is a really important topic, and is a topic that we'll talk about next week. So hopefully this brief introduction to family reverence through the words of Confucius and the Analects showed you that it's actually something that remains very relevant, very practical and useful for our lives today. And if we can do it, we can make an impact not only on our family, but also the society and in times to come. So I leave you with that thought. Thank you very much for listening, and look forward to seeing you next week.